And I'd just like to acknowledge for a moment that story that we heard. Those voices that shared the remarkable history of this place. And I don't know about you, but I could feel that spirit of welcome, that spirit of justice, of compassion and joy right here within this building. Even as I know it was shared in so many ways within this community. We are blessed. We are grateful to have such a story. I've been a part of this church for 15 years, and in those 15 years, I must have passed that somber-looking bust of Amory Bradford in the tower room thousands of times. And for years, if I'd go to the archives, I'd notice the row of his books gathering dust. He wrote 14 volumes in his day. And I've studied his serious portrait, the mutton-chop sideburns and the high-starched collar. I certainly thought of him as a saint of this church, a lofty, historical figure to be revered, important, but distant and unrelatable. And then a few years ago, during one of our epic guild room cleanouts, someone unearthed a slim, delicate volume in the recesses of one of those back cupboards. And it was a commemorative book of the 25th anniversary celebration of this church in 1895. "You should read this," she said. "It could make a wonderful sermon." I was a little skeptical. I've long known that Bradford was noteworthy and historically significant, but I believed he's the past of this church. The 150 years that separate our congregations might as well be 1,000 for all the differences between us. What could he possibly have to say to us now? Well, this morning we heard what he has to say. And he is speaking directly to us and about us, here and now. Amory Bradford had a clear vision for how a church can be an agent of change in the world. How it could break out of its stained glass cage and speak to the real issues that were confronting real people. How it could make God truly present for the people that it cared for. How it could be so much more than an institution. How it could be a movement. In our modern lesson today, shared by so many voices who display who we are today as a church, we can see how Bradford embedded his spiritual DNA in this place. How it has been lived out over this last century and a half. He led with a mission for justice and a heart for compassion and a spirit of joy. He found God in the ordinary and the overlooked and the neglected. He found hope in new energy of a changing world and the possibilities of a church that always led first and foremost with love. And it's inspiring to hear, and it's worth knowing, and it's worth telling again and again. It helps us understand where we came from. But we're not here today just to celebrate our past history, but to ask ourselves this essential question: what next? Who are we now? What realities are we facing? How can we make God feel real in this world? 150 years ago, the purpose of churches was clear and unquestioned. They were woven right into the fabric of civic life. Today, we have a lot of questions. Institutions that were once revealed have been shown to have a shadow side. Doctrines that once seemed to hold eternal truths are feeling exclusive and archaic and irrelevant. Soccer games and yoga classes, Sunday brunch and tea times have become our Sunday rituals. And the question of why church remains. 2 weeks ago, I attended the closing worship of a UCC church in Chatham that had been around for 152 years. Just 2 years older than we are. The latest statistics tell us that approximately 5,000 churches a year close. 5,000. We see that in our own town. The church that Harry Emerson Fosdick led, the author of our first hymn, is now Bang's Salon. There are churches now that are office buildings, restaurants, And a few years ago, before things started to renew in this church, we were having those very same conversations. Who should we be? Do we deserve to stay here in this esteemed space? What is our calling? Closing the doors of that Chatham church is a stark reminder that faith communities must never be complacent. Never just look back to the past for where God is speaking. Like Bradford, they must be places where new voices tell a new story about how God is newly at work in the world. And we must be brave enough to ask ourselves, do we have a reason to exist? Do we have something to say into this culture? Can we be a place where it is clear that God is still speaking now? Amory Bradford carried all those same questions on his heart when he started this church. He was facing a society that was fractured by racism and economic injustice, still bleeding from a civil war. He was speaking into a community, a wealthy community here that was complacent and privileged and blind to the struggles of those living right here among them. He was serving in an era when technology changed the face of industry, but also turned people into cogs in a machine bent on production and consumption. And to truly be an agent of change, the one that he knew God needed, he was going to have to create a very special church to speak into those realities, and he did. And now it's our turn. We can too. Yes, our culture, our expectations, our lives have changed in the last 150 years. But there's something that has never changed. We are still a spiritually hungry people. We still long to be part of something that is larger than ourselves, something that matters. With phones in our hands, we are up to our ears in information, but we crave wisdom. With 1,000 channels to entertain us, we are still starved for meaning. We can shape our bodies through exercise and modern medicine, but what we really want is to be transformed. We want to be more than what we are. We want to be part of a storytelling community that taps into our deep longings and our deep questions and passes on the wisdom of those who came before us. A community that gets out of our fearful silos and reminds us that we aren't alone in this struggle, that we are made in the image of a force of love and a force of life that will walk with us through every challenge we face. We want to be part of a community that sees the world with open eyes, that knows that God has a better vision, a better dream, and we want to find ways to work together to make it real. We don't want to be just an institution stuck in the past. We want to be a movement that takes us into the future. This was Bradford's vision, the one that he has entrusted to us. After 40 years in this pulpit, he found the words that we need to hear even today. He shared them with his congregation as he was coming to the end of his life and the end of his ministry, and he had a dream for this church. That dream is actually on the back of your bulletins, along with a picture of Bradford at the age of 23 when he pastored this church. I'd like us to lift up those words together, to own this vision, to commit to his call. And so if you'll turn at the back of the bulletin, let's share his words together. My earnest hope for the church in the future is that under worthy leadership, it may become a rejoicing and victorious church, which keeps the gospel in the foreground, whose doors are never closed, which is glad in the Spirit of Christ to go about doing good, and which finds its supreme joy in continuing Christ's ministry to all sorts and conditions of people. For the blessings which we have enjoyed, let us thank God, while we gratefully face the tasks of the coming years. The horizon of the future is radiant, with the promise and prophecy of still better things. Friends, Amory Bradford led this church in daunting times, and so do we. He lived in a world that was fracturing over changing demographics, struggles to hold on to power and world-shaking technology, and so do we. Bradford created the church for his time, and now building on his legacy, we are invited to create the church needed for ours. Who will be the new people that we need to give a broad welcome? What will be the new crises that rock our world and need a voice of faith and hope and justice to speak into them? How will we meet the needs of a changing world? These are the big questions, I know. But I think the answer is found right here, right now, this morning. There is power in who we are. Look around at the people who are in this room with you. Just by our very existence as a multiracial, multicultural, open and affirming, just and peace-loving congregation, we are being those agents of change. We are showing what the kingdom of God can look like right here and right now. We are taking the legacy we have been given and running with it in ways that Bradford could never have even imagined. And we are now entrusted to live this vision out into the future. I don't know what's in store for us, but I know that we have got it within us to meet whatever it comes, to continue this amazing story of justice, compassion, and joy into the next generation, and the next, and the next, and the next. We know this is our calling, and we will not be afraid. We will respond. It's in our DNA. May it be so today and for the next 150 years.